It's that improvement throughout the year that's been helpful for Indiana. You see it on the record, you see it on the wins and losses, but you also see it, play to play, sequence to sequence, possession to possession. You see moments where there's evidence of this team being better than it was, and that may help it reach the Big Ten tournament. I know that this team is winning in against Penn State. They're kind of at the top of that bubble range right now. If they beat Penn State at home on February 28th, I honestly don't know. That's tomorrow, Saturday, February 28th, in the afternoon. If they win, they're in. If they lose, it gets a little tricky. And you probably know the scenarios better than anyone, better than myself, and better than most other people. So I'll give the floor to you. You don't have to go through every single one, but kind of the main takeaways. What teams are in danger? What teams still have work to do? And what are kind of the big swing games, the big swing moments for IU and just across the board there at the bubble of the Big Ten tournament?
Yeah, so I was kind of looking at there's four big games for that bubble kind of conversation. It's the Penn State-Indiana game. Rutgers is playing at Nebraska. Iowa's playing at Wisconsin, and then Purdue is playing at Northwestern. So that's kind of that group from 12 to 16 in the Big Ten standings. I think every single scenario where Indiana beats Penn State, they're in. And 8 of those scenarios, there's 8 scenarios, 6 of them, they get a 13 seed. So they would be playing the 12 seed, which every single one of those scenarios, it's Nebraska. Indiana lost that game, but that was a good while ago. And I think I would like that matchup now. I think that would be a fun game. There's also a couple scenarios where there's 2 scenarios where they're a 14 seed too. But Penn State does scare me, I will say. I think it should scare Indiana. That's Gracie Merkel, Kiyomi McMillan, 2 really high-level scorers at 2 different areas in the court. That's going to be a scary game. So if you look at their losing scenarios for Indiana, there's out of 8 of those scenarios, there's 2 where they miss out. And so they're going to need to win. I think that's the biggest thing. So you're looking at a Penn State win, a Nebraska win, Wisconsin beating Iowa, which would be an upset, a pretty big upset, and then Purdue beating Northwestern. So in that scenario, Indiana's 5-13, Purdue's 5-13, Penn State is also 5-13. But how the tiebreakers work in the Big Ten, which was a little confusing to try to wrap my head around, I would say yesterday. You kind of look at it, and it's like you look at the records versus each other, and then if those are the same, then you look at the record versus the first place team in the conference, and then if that's the same, then you start going down the second place, third place. But then it's also, if there's teams that are tied, like Michigan and Iowa are at second and third, they're both 14-3, then you have to look at their record versus the collective. So you have to look at the record versus Michigan and Iowa. So you just got to keep on going down until one team gains the advantage, and Penn State and Purdue would gain that advantage over Indiana in that scenario. And then another scenario like that, which would have Penn State, Purdue, and Indiana at 5-13. Just the only difference between that one and the one I just mentioned would be Rutgers beating Nebraska. So Penn State win, a Rutgers win, a Wisconsin win, and Purdue win. I don't think Rutgers is going to beat Nebraska. I think that would be a very interesting upset. That would it would make Rutgers 6-12 and Wisconsin 6-12. So Wisconsin would have the 12 seed, Nebraska would have the 13 seed, and Indiana's out. But there's a good chance that they're in. I mean, 14 out of these 16 scenarios have them in. I didn't spend the time yesterday, I will say, going through the whole entire bracket because there's still a lot of teams that are kind of clumped together. I would say you have that kind of group after these teams, so kind of that 11 seed and down, when you have Illinois, USC, Washington, and Oregon. Illinois, USC, Washington are all 9-8, and then Oregon's 8-9, and Oregon plays Washington. So all those seeds could kind of change around, and your 10 seed and your 11 seed do play on that Wednesday. I believe the 10 plays the 15, the 11 plays the 14. So those seeds could change around. So Indiana's first round opponent could kind of change Sunday depending on how those results play out. But it's win and you're in. And that's the biggest thing for Saturday for Indiana. Win and you're in, and you get most likely a 13 seed, and you play Nebraska. And I think that's a good matchup for them at this point in the season.
Absolutely. And even when that game happened, you mentioned how you would like it now, but if that game did occur, I even felt good about it then. At that time, obviously against Britt Prince and that Nebraska team, one of those where you're like, they played well, I'm impressed with how they played, but they obviously lost, and it was in the middle of that losing streak, and it's like, you're still disappointed that loss occurred, but certainly you're like, okay, well, this team's great. The IU team played well. What more can you really ask for? I want to ask then as well, I'll go ahead and go through my predictions for those 4 games, and then therefore the seeds, and then I'll have you do the same. I want to see if they're the same, and then we'll talk about what those first-round matchups would be. Obviously, the 10 and 11 seed, as you mentioned, very up in the air. I just took 10 seed Washington, 11 seed Oregon. I know Illinois could drop down there. I'd love that because I'm really interested in Illinois. But I think IU beats Penn State at home when they need to. I think they advance to the Big Ten tournament as a result. I have Nebraska over Rutgers just because I think there's such a sizable gap between those two teams. I have Iowa over Wisconsin. Wisconsin is one of those teams that I just don't really like at all. When I watch a basketball team enough, like Big Ten teams, even outside of Indiana, there's some reason why I fall in love with them, and I'm like, this team is great. For Rutgers, it's Amani Lester. There's a reason. Like, I would want to see Rutgers play again, just so I can watch Amani Lester play again, among others. Penn State the same way. Gracie Merkel and Kiyomi McMillan, that tandem's awesome. Brett Prince is awesome. Like, there's a reason why I want to watch every team. I just don't have that with Wisconsin. Maybe because I haven't exposed myself to them enough this season, didn't watch them enough. I never developed that connection with Wisconsin. Iowa, on the other hand, obviously a very potent offense. Obviously, just scored a ton of points against Illinois last night, and the 2 seed in the Big Ten tournament officially after that result. I'll have Iowa over Wisconsin, and then I have Purdue over Northwestern because similar to IU, I think Purdue is that kind of team that's going to win when it needs to down the stretch. Northwestern's not bad. They're kind of similar to Penn State, where they're a little bit tricky. That game against Indiana was obviously a tricky one for the Hoosiers as well. I'll take Purdue over Northwestern, though. So that means that I have 12 Nebraska, 13 Indiana, 14 Wisconsin, 15 Purdue. And as much as I love Penn State and as great as their win was last week, a little bit too little too late for the Nittany Lions. What say you?
I think I'm kind of on the same lines as you. I think it's Indiana. I think it's Nebraska. I think it's Iowa. I think those are the 3 clear cuts. I think Nebraska beating Rutgers is bound to happen. I think Iowa beating Wisconsin is kind of bound to happen too. And so then you're looking at the Indiana game and you're looking at the Purdue game. I think the way Indiana has played, I think they can put up more points than Penn State. And I think that's what you need to do. I mean, to win basketball games, but that's kind of Penn State. You're going to have Gracie Merkel. You're going to have McMillan. They're going to score a lot. McMillan just scored 40 points against USC the other night. I think Wednesday night that game was played. Like, it's just shutting down those other options for Penn State. Once you start going past those 2, it's like your next leading scorer is at like 9. And it's like Gracie Merkel's averaging like 18 plus, I believe, and like Kiyomi McMillan is in the 20s this season. So it's like you're gonna need to, you can shut down those other options and kind of let Kiyomi McMillan score a little bit. I think there's a certain point where it's maybe a little bit too much scoring. I think if she goes for more than 30, then you're kind of questioning if Indiana can win that game. But I think Indiana wins, I think Nebraska wins, I think Iowa wins, and then I'm going to take Purdue over Northwestern. So you're looking at Penn State being out of the Big Ten tournament, and you're going to have Indiana at a 13 seed, and I think that's kind of where I'm going with that. And you said Iowa was officially a 2 seed, but I feel like they could drop down to a 3 seed.
You might be right
because they're tied with Michigan at 14-3, so they still have a game there because Michigan plays Maryland, I believe, Saturday.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think those 2 could switch.
Okay. I'm not going to out the podcast on. I saw someone reputable post that Iowa's locked in, and obviously if they're both 14-3, you're definitely correct. So I'm not going to out who misled me there, but yeah, so they're up there for sure.
I will say this weekend, last regular season weekend of Big Ten hoops, Big Ten women's hoops. If you're not watching, I think you're missing out. Maryland, Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State, Minnesota, Illinois, UCLA, USC. Those are four really high-level matchups. And I think those are four matchups to watch, if you kind of haven't watched a lot this season, that you can watch these games and then you're like going into March, you'll be like, I really like the Big Ten. This is the best women's college basketball conference out there. I think the SEC has a little bit can argue against that. They have some really good teams at the top with South Carolina and Texas and LSU, but I think overall the Big Ten just plays, in my opinion, as somebody who loves the Big Ten and watches it a good amount over the SEC, I think they're the best women's college basketball conference there is.
Yeah, and a lot of those teams you mentioned are going to be, in pretty significant key seeds in the NCAA tournament when we get there, which will make that a lot of fun. I was talking to you the other day about just how much more fun March is going to be after having paid very close attention to all of these teams. And obviously, you and I kind of have a Big Ten focus, so, I'm in love with Illinois kind of for no reason. But they're going to be a 9 seed that breaks my heart when they lose to a 1 seed and, that kind of thing. But there are teams in there that are going to be a ton of fun. According to both of our predictions, and if the 10 and 11 seed hold, I know Illinois can drop. The Minnesota game's pretty significant in terms of that one. And there's more scenarios in play. But at the moment, the 10 seed is Washington, and they would be playing Purdue under our predictions. Purdue beat Washington in the regular season, and Washington's a team I really, really like. So that's a fun game. And then you have Oregon and Wisconsin. Oregon's a team I couldn't figure out for the whole year. I still don't understand what I'm looking at. I think they're awesome. They're the 11th seed. It's kind of confusing. Wisconsin I mentioned. And then it would be Nebraska-Indiana, which we kind of touched on as a game that could be very, very interesting, especially in Indianapolis. What are your thoughts on those three hypothetical matchups on the Wednesday of the Big Ten tournament under our predictions?
Yeah, I like that. I like that matchup between Indiana and Nebraska. I mean, that game was played in January, the start of January, and Nebraska was ranked at the time. They're not close to being ranked now, but at the time they were. And Indiana loses that game by 5. And it was kind of during that winning streak, there was kind of those two back-to-back games, and it was at Nebraska where they kind of fizzled out at the end, and it was at home against Iowa where they kind of fizzled out. But they lose the Nebraska game by 5, they lose the Iowa game by 3. And I think that was kind of just like they have the talent. Indiana has the talent. And I think those two games kind of showed it. I just think if those two games were played now and they kind of enter the fourth quarter in the same spot, I think they could pull out wins in those two games. So I think I really like the Nebraska matchup. You were kind of saying, I don't know really what to make of Oregon and Wisconsin too. Those are just two teams that are just confusing this season. Wisconsin likes to shoot the 3 a lot, but as you were saying, you don't really have that number one option. It's kind of just like a group effort, I would say. Like Destiny Howell, I believe, is leading them points per game this season, and she's at like 14, and so it's just a group effort. I think Wisconsin, if they're making their threes at a high level, maybe they can go on a little bit of a run, but I just don't see that in conference play. And I think there's been many cases where teams that are kind of over reliant on the 3-point shot that's kind of burned them in these win or go home kind of games. And that other game too, which would be, if you say it again, it would be...
Yeah, that would be... So we had Washington-Purdue.
Washington-Purdue. Yeah, that's... I really like this Washington team. Yeah. I do. I think they're like one of my dark horses, and in Purdue, I believe Madison Lee-Zay might have had an injury the other day, and she's like their best player on that Purdue team, and I just can't see Purdue winning again in a neutral site. I know that game was played at Purdue, at Mackey, and Washington had to make the trip to Indiana, and now they have to do it again for the Big Ten tournament. But I just can't see Washington, or I guess I can't see Purdue kind of pulling off the upset again.
Yeah, and those are. They do feel like they're on different tiers. If I were making a tier list, if I had 3 sections, like the true conference championship contenders, and then the good teams I would like to see in the tournament, and then the teams that are kind of rebuilding. I'd have obviously Washington in Tier 2 and Purdue in Tier 3. It'd be a very exciting Wednesday nonetheless, regardless of how this whole thing shakes out, and it'll be sad to see whoever sits at number 16 in the standings out of the tournament.